Imagine you are chasing something that always seems to be a few steps ahead of you, a shadow that lengthens as you run. That image is the quiet architecture of most people's financial lives. Motion without arrival, movement that feels like progress, but is really only a tired echo. You hustle from job to side hustle to another job, and each new check arrives with the same small sigh of relief, followed quickly by a fresh chase. There is a dignity to effort, of course, but there is also a tragic loop. Effort without alignment tends to create more of what you fear: scarcity, anxiety, the sense that you are never quite enough. Beneath the most ambitious plan often sits a softer, less visible driver, a fear that whispers you might run out, that someone else might seize the chance you missed, that your tomorrow will not hold what your today lacks. This is not the noble fear that sharpens skill. It is the cramped fear that narrows possibility. It makes you conservative in all the wrong ways, convincing you that prudence equals security, when in truth it often means domestication of your own potential. You learn to trade dreams for schedules, spontaneity for spreadsheets, and soon your currency becomes an anxious rhythm rather than a deliberate instrument. We confuse motion for meaning because it is easier to measure. Hours worked, tasks completed, dollars saved. Paychecks become proof that we are responsible, proof that we belong to the safe club. But proof is a brittle currency. It does not warm the heart. There are people who can quote their bank balances with the kind of reverence one reserves for scripture, and still feel hollow when the lights go out. The paradox is this: the very mechanisms built to protect us from want, relentless work, rigid saving, constant caution, can, if unchecked, become the walls of a small room where life's larger possibilities are stifled. This is not to romanticize risk or to dismiss the value of sensible planning. Far from it. The wealthy as a group are not fearless. They are not reckless. They simply learned a different grammar of choice. They read scarcity and responded with scarcity, while others read the same world and responded with abundance. Think of it as a language. One person hears the sound of a closed door and thinks loss. Another hears the same door and thinks the echo of a room waiting to be shaped. As James Clear reminds us, you do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. The wealthy design mental systems that allow opportunity to be seen and acted upon, not merely feared. There is a quieter way to approach money, one that begins not at the bank, but at the bedside of your own thinking. Napoleon Hill once put it plainly: whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. That warning and that permission are twin engines. They tell us that beliefs are not ornaments to be admired, but tools to be used. If your mind is conditioned to expect lack, your choices will arrange themselves around scarcity, like anxious sentinels. If your mind is trained to search for value, to understand risk as tuition and failure as feedback, your life will begin to align with different outcomes. It is less about tricking reality and more about tuning perception. So the essential question shifts. Rather than asking how to make more money, ask how to think differently about wealth. This is not clever semantics. It changes where you spend your energy. Instead of working harder to prove your worth, you learn to cultivate worth that is independent of every paycheck. Instead of assuming every opportunity is a threat, you start diagnosing which opportunities are truly aligned with what you can create and sustain. The wealthy who move through life with apparent ease are not exempt from storms. They are simply practiced at steering, not at clinging to the mast. There is a certain quiet courage in choosing to see the world with different eyes. It asks you to be honest about the stories you have accepted, the lines you repeat about money that were handed down as warnings rather than maps. It asks you to let curiosity outpace fear, to test your assumptions, and to treat your inner voice as a subject of study rather than an immovable law. The next chapters of this audiobook will explore those stories and teach you how to edit them, not with platitudes, but with a series of practical mental shifts that change behavior from the inside out. For now, hold this thought: chasing money keeps it distant. Changing the way you think about money brings it into reach. Every fortune begins in a place we cannot see, the landscape of belief. Before a single dollar is earned, before a single opportunity appears, the seed of wealth is planted in the soil of thought. It is an invisible process, one that happens quietly within the mind long before it ever shows up in the world. Most people don't realize this. They think of money as something that exists out there, in markets, paychecks, or bank accounts, and so they spend their entire lives trying to reach it. But the wealthy understand a different truth. Money doesn't start in the world. It starts in the mind. It is a reflection of how you think, how you see possibility, and what you believe about yourself in relation to the world around you. As Napoleon Hill once wrote, "Whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe, it can achieve." Those words are often quoted, sometimes even dismissed as overly simple, but simplicity doesn't make them less true. Every meaningful change in a person's life begins with an internal shift, a reorientation of how reality is interpreted. When you believe you are a victim of circumstance, your choices mirror that belief. You become cautious, defensive, reactive. But when you believe you are the creator of circumstance, you start to make decisions with vision, with ownership, with courage. The same world, the same tools, the same rules, yet entirely different outcomes. The difference lies not in resources, but in perception. Imagine two people walking into the same room. The first sees obstacles, things that could go wrong, people who might reject their ideas, risks that might end badly. The second sees potential, opportunities to create, collaborate, or learn. They are standing in the same space, breathing the same air, but inhabiting entirely different realities. Belief is what shapes the contours of those realities. It acts as a lens that either narrows your vision or expands it. And the more you believe that wealth is scarce, the more the world will seem to confirm it. The more you believe that opportunity is everywhere, the more it will appear. Most people inherit their beliefs about money without ever questioning where they came from. Childhood conversations, family arguments about bills, the tone of voice adults used when discussing rich people, all of it becomes part of the script running quietly in the background of your mind. If you grew up hearing that money is hard to come by, or that rich people are greedy, or that security comes only from playing it safe, those words don't disappear when you grow older. They simply evolve into subconscious limits, guiding your behavior long after you've forgotten their source. You might think you're making rational financial decisions, but in truth, you're often acting out someone else's fears. There's a generational echo to this, a kind of emotional inheritance. Families pass down not just genes but narratives, stories about survival, scarcity, and worth. Some people grow up internalizing the unspoken rule that comfort is dangerous, that wanting more means you're ungrateful for what you have. Others inherit the belief that struggle is noble, that only through exhaustion can one prove value. These are not facts. They are beliefs disguised as truths, and when repeated long enough, they become invisible. You stop noticing them, even as they quietly dictate how much you allow yourself to earn, to enjoy, to create. The tragedy isn't that these beliefs exist, it's that we rarely examine them. We build our futures on them, calling them common sense because everyone around us seems to agree. But what if common sense is simply collective limitation? What if the things most people take for granted about money are precisely what keep them trapped in cycles of anxiety and lack? Morgan Housel once observed, "Your personal experiences with money make up maybe 0.001% of what's happened in the world, but maybe 80% of how you think the world works." The point is simple. We form beliefs about money from limited data, yet we act as though those beliefs are universal law. The wealthy, consciously or not, have learned to question this programming. They recognize that belief systems can be rewritten, just like software. If the mind can be programmed for limitation, it can also be programmed for liberation. The process begins with awareness, noticing your inner dialogue about money. Every time you tell yourself, "I can't afford that," or "people like me don't get chances like that," you're reinforcing a boundary that exists only in thought. When you start asking, "How could I afford that?" or "What would it take for me to be the kind of person who can?" the mind shifts from defense to creativity. The change is subtle but profound. You stop reacting to money and start relating to it. This shift is not about magical thinking or pretending challenges don't exist. It's about reclaiming authorship over your own internal script. It's about realizing that your beliefs aren't reflections of truth. They are creators of it. The wealthy operate from this understanding. They see money as energy, as feedback, as a measure of value creation, not as a measure of self-worth or security. They use it consciously, guided by clarity rather than fear. For them, earning is not merely an act of accumulation, but an expression of alignment between vision and value. Transformation doesn't begin when you earn differently. It begins when you believe differently. Because the truth is, most people try to change their financial life from the outside in, by chasing opportunities, working longer hours, or forcing discipline. But the outer world always bends to the inner world. Until you rewire your relationship with money, no amount of strategy can sustain wealth. The mind must arrive before the bank account does. When wealth becomes mental before it becomes material, you are no longer chasing money. You are attracting alignment. So, pause for a moment and reflect. What beliefs have you inherited that no longer serve the life you want to build? Which fears have you mistaken for wisdom? These are not rhetorical questions. They are invitations to awareness, because every story about money begins not with numbers, but with narrative. And when you change the narrative, the numbers start to follow. The next step of this journey will take us deeper into how those beliefs shape the small, daily moments of life, the choices you make without thinking, the emotional patterns that either build your fortune or erode it. But before we go there, remember this. The mind is the first marketplace and belief is the currency. Spend it wisely. The mind is not a backstage player in the theater of your life. It is the stage itself. It sets the lighting, chooses the music, decides which props matter and which are swept away. When we say belief influences money, we mean something far more intimate. It frames how you wake, how you answer the phone at dawn, how you respond when an unexpected bill arrives or an unexpected opportunity knocks. The daily rituals of thought translate into the daily rituals of action. Small gestures, what you say to yourself in the shower, the questions you ask during a commute, the way you frame a mistake, seed a larger pattern. Over weeks and months these patterns compound, not with interest in a bank, but with the invisible currency of character and habit. Fear is a blunt instrument. It reduces a wide world into a narrow survival problem. When fear runs the script, every door looks like a trapdoor, every handshake like a gamble. You begin to catalog life by what you might lose rather than what you might create, and decisions shrink into conservative, defensive moves. Contrast that with a mind guided by faith, not necessarily religious faith, but a steadier conviction that effort can be fruitful and that setbacks are often invitations. In that posture, obstacles do not announce the end of the road. They mark the borders of a field to be explored. The same market headlines, the same job descriptions, the same social dynamics present themselves differently, depending on whether you view them through the lens of scarcity or possibility. Trust in abundance is not a naive optimism that ignores reality. It is a practical disposition that allows clarity to emerge under pressure. A person who trusts abundance does not scramble at the first sign of trouble. They breathe, assess, and allocate energy where it matters. They cultivate precision in their choices because anxiety is not the engine driving them. Strategy is. This does not mean they are immune to emotion. Rather, they have trained themselves to notice emotion without being hijacked by it. Over time, this calm attention compounds. Decisions once made in panic are later made with deliberation, and the cumulative effect is quieter life and more effective action. Think of emotional steadiness like compound interest for the inner life. At first, it is almost invisible, a barely noticeable shift in the ease with which you confront minor uncertainties. Then, months later, you find you no longer lose sleep over the same problems. The tiny daily practices, pausing before responding to an offer, setting a financial boundary, scheduling time to learn, pile up much the way deposits in a savings account accumulate into something unexpectedly large. What was once a shaky resolve becomes a stable disposition. You begin to notice that people who are brilliant in hindsight were rarely brilliant in a crisis. They were steady in the small moments that precede crisis, and that steadiness allowed them to act clearly when it mattered. There comes a day when choices that once felt dangerous start to feel natural, and that transition is not magic but habituation. When you have repeatedly leaned toward thoughtful risk, the neural pathways that support courage strengthen. The first time you make a strategic investment or speak up in a meeting, your body may resist. By the 10th time, it feels ordinary. The transformation is subtle. What once required extraordinary will becomes routine. This is important because financial life is decided more often by habit than by occasional heroic gestures. The millionaire's edge, more often than not, is the quiet regularity of well-chosen habits acting over years. What changes in this process is not the world itself, but the lens through which it is seen. External events remain ambiguous. They are raw material. Your belief system assigns meaning to that material. When your lens is narrow, you see threats and scarcity. When it is wide, you spot patterns, gaps, and potential pathways. This is why two equally talented people can experience the same market downturn and emerge with completely different stories. One sees proof that markets are cruel and contracts are risky. The other sees a teaching moment, a bargain, or a chance to recalibrate. The outward circumstances may be identical, but the inner interpretation becomes the diverging road. This lens does more than alter perception. It prepares the mind for mastery. Mastery is not a badge earned overnight, but a condition cultivated when belief and practice converge. When your daily life is orchestrated by a belief in possibility, you invest less in frantic reaction and more in skill, relationships, and patience. The habits you form become instruments that multiply over time. Your attention sharpens, your reputation grows, your capacity for meaningful risk increases. In essence, mindset becomes a kind of mastery because it reorients all smaller actions toward coherent long-term objectives. This is the quiet alchemy of wealth, not merely acquiring resources, but refining the inner mechanisms that reliably create them. So pause and notice the small decisions you make today, the language you use with yourself, the way you interpret a delay, the degree of generosity in your thinking. These are not trivial. They are the scaffolding of future outcomes. As your lens widens and steadiness takes root, you will find that the mind's daily chores, how you wake, how you decide, how you frame risk, transform from noisy survival tactics into deliberate tools of creation. That change does not erase difficulty, but it changes what difficulty does to you. And once the mind starts to master its own rhythms, the rest of life follows in a truer, more patient tempo. We speak of wealth as if it were a headline event, a lottery win, a lucky investment, an inheritance that changes everything overnight. But that's a shallow story. The real sources of fortune are quieter, older, and deeper. Patterns of attention, habits of interpretation, and the tiny, often invisible choices made when no one is watching. Think of wealth as a tree. People talk about the fruit, the visible money, while ignoring the soil, the root system, the decades of sunlight and drought that shaped that growth. The inner architecture of wealth is exactly that. An ecosystem of beliefs, reactions, and small practices that, compounded over time, yield outcomes most mistake for chance. The self-made do not treat money like a deity to be worshipped or a goal to be exhaustedly pursued. They study it as a subject, cause and effect, emotion and incentive, the grammar of exchange. Where many see a number on a screen, they see a conversation. Who provides value, who receives it, and why? They understand that fortunes are not merely accumulated, but attracted by patterns of behavior and thought. A craftsman who refines his skill, a founder who learns to listen to customers, a saver who learns the rhythm of patience, all are building infrastructure long before the bank balance reflects it. Failure, to most, feels like a verdict. We tuck it into a file labeled, "I told you so," and let it harden into identity. The wealthy, however, have a different ledger. They record failure as tuition, painful, expensive lessons that teach which strategies are worth repeating and which habits to discard. I once met an entrepreneur who described 3 bankruptcies as the best education he ever received. Each collapse stripped away vanity and revealed what truly mattered. There's a brutal generosity in failure. It forces honest accounting. When failure is tuition, risk becomes an experiment rather than a moral failure. And experiments, even failed ones, leave behind data. There is a quiet contradiction at the heart of risk and reward. The moment fear ceases to dominate choices, the landscape of opportunity changes shape. Fear tightens the muscles and narrows the field of vision. It turns reasonable caution into paralysis. But when loss is no longer the primary lens, decisions move from scarcity-driven reaction to value-driven creation. People who learn to tolerate the discomfort of possible loss often find that opportunities, previously invisible, begin to appear. It's not that they stop caring about downside. They simply refuse to let downside dictate the range of what they will try. That shift, from avoidance to selective engagement, is what separates a perpetually anxious saver from an investor who builds resilient portfolios. Every financial decision is braided with emotion. We dress feelings in rational clothes and call them budgeting or planning. But beneath the policies lie fears and longings. Fear of scarcity masquerades as prudence. Yearning for esteem appears as conspicuous investment. The wealthy have not eradicated emotion. They have learned to treat it as information, not command. They listen to the tremor of anxiety and the pull of desire, then ask clarifying questions. Is this fear guiding me away from a necessary risk, or is it protecting a value I intend to keep? Is this desire a hunger for status, or a signal that I can add genuine value? Emotion becomes a sensor, not a steering wheel. So the practical question becomes philosophical and then practical again. Can the mind be trained to lead the heart without silencing it? The answer from observation is yes. Training the mind is not an exercise in stoicism. It is the cultivation of a reflective space between feeling and action. Meditation, deliberate pause, journaling, mentorship, and small accountability habits create that space. In it, we can acknowledge the shy voice of fear without automatically yielding to its instructions. We honor emotion's wisdom, its warnings, its fuel, while reserving final decisions for a clearer lens of purpose and evidence. If you imagine changing your financial life purely through spreadsheets, you will be disappointed. The spreadsheets respond to the rhythms you have already created in thought and habit. Reworking your internal architecture, noticing inherited fears, reframing failure as tuition, allowing emotion to inform rather than control, is the real labor. It is quieter and slower, but it is durable. When your inner systems are well built, they become habitual scaffolding. You make better choices effortlessly, protect value intelligently, and create more of what you want, without exhausting yourself in the chase. The next sections will show practical ways to soil that inner garden. Small, repeatable practices that build the root system beneath any future fruit. There is a common comfort in the idea that if we plan perfectly, if we budget with precision and control every line on a ledger, we will purchase safety. It's comforting because it hands the future to us in tidy columns: predict, allocate, repeat. Yet money, unlike a machine, is not obedient to our will. It is responsive to clarity. You can attempt to micromanage every cent, but if the underlying purpose is foggy, if the why, the values, and the tension between present enjoyment and future security are unresolved, every plan becomes a brittle script that breaks under the slightest surprise. Control feels productive because it creates visible activity. Clarity feels productive because it creates direction. The quiet difference between the two is the difference between surviving and composing a life that can sustain wealth. Most people chase security in the outward forms they understand. More savings, safer investments, a thicker emergency fund. These are not bad aims, they are human. But when security is pursued as an end in itself, it often produces the opposite feeling: anxiety. You may pile up assets while your nervous system remains taxed, convinced that more is the antidote to fear. The paradox is clear. Accumulation can anesthetize for a moment, but it rarely resolves the deeper story that hunger is telling. You might buy a larger house to feel safer and discover new responsibilities, greater upkeep, and a fresh set of worries that feel heavier than the old ones. The attempt to own safety through wealth can become a treadmill where each step forward only reveals new thresholds of what you think you must protect. We hold an illusion that the more we have, the freer we become, but freedom is not the same as abundance. Freedom is a relationship to what you own and to what owns you. It is the capacity to make decisions without being driven by fear of loss or by the need for constant validation. A person who needs everything to feel free will never be free. Their possessions become shackles disguised as shields. True wealth, then, is not defined by the breadth of your holdings, but by the slenderness of your needs and the wise use of what you have. It's the paradox of enough. The less you need, the more options you actually possess. Ambition is a necessary engine of growth, but it can stealthily morph into anxiety. There is a narrow line between the hunger that propels innovation and the hunger that gnaws at contentment. Many talented people find themselves in a late-night negotiation with ambition, promising themselves that if they just do one more deal, reach one more milestone, the restlessness will ease. But achievements do not always soothe the restless heart. Instead, they can amplify it. because every new success raises the bar of what must be preserved. Before long, the race to build becomes a race to defend, and preservation requires vigilance, which breeds worry. Recognizing when ambition has become fear is the first act of maturity in financial life. The most graceful financial lives I have observed are not those of the people who try to own money like a fortress, but those who learn to let it move like water. This does not mean carelessness or waste. It means stewardship. Water flows through channels that are clear and well-maintained, nourishing fields without clinging to the banks. Money, when allowed to flow with intention, funds projects, supports relationships, and returns in cycles rather than being hoarded into stagnant pools. Allowing flow requires trust in systems, in relationships, and in one's ability to replenish. Not blind faith, but disciplined generosity, coupled with thoughtful reinvestment. It turns money from a thing to be guarded into a force that circulates value. Choosing to allow money to flow is not a single act, but a practice. It begins with clarity about priorities, what truly matters, what brings sustainable fulfillment, and which habits create durable security. Once those are clear, choices are simpler and less anxiety-laden. You can say no without second-guessing because your yes is anchored by intention. You can invest in growth without trembling because your orbit includes safety mechanisms and contingency, not because you hoarded every possible cent. This is a practiced looseness, a confidence that comes from preparedness and meaning rather than from panic. It is the calm born of a plan that reflects who you are, not merely what you fear. In the flow, an unexpected realization often arrives. Freedom is not a product you buy. It is a posture you adopt. You can spend a lifetime accumulating enough to feel safe and still be fearful. Or you can cultivate internal systems, clear priorities, reliable habits, generous impulses that enable you to act freely within the circumstances you have. Freedom chosen this way is resilient. It does not collapse when a market dips or an unexpected expense appears. Instead, it reveals options, because when you are clear and calm, creativity replaces scarcity thinking. The work of becoming financially free, therefore, is less about wresting control from the world and more about regaining control over how you relate to it. In that regained relationship, money stops being a relentless master and becomes what it should be, a tool for expression, contribution, and a life lived with purpose. There comes a moment in every seeker's journey, a quiet, piercing moment, when the pursuit of wealth turns inward. For years we search in the external world, new strategies, new mentors, new markets, new methods. But eventually, something begins to echo beneath the surface, a subtle question rising from the stillness. What if the limits I keep encountering outside are simply mirrors of the limits I've built within? It's a sobering thought, because it removes the comforting illusion that circumstances alone dictate our outcomes. It shifts the spotlight from the world's fairness to our own awareness. That's the moment of awakening, the moment when the chase slows. The noise fades and we finally turn the mirror toward ourselves. For some, this awakening arrives after exhaustion, after years of grinding, accumulating, striving, yet still feeling strangely hollow. For others, it's born from a loss, a business that failed, a partnership that dissolved, a market that didn't care about your plans. Pain has a way of clearing illusions faster than success ever can. It strips away excuses and leaves only questions that matter. Why am I doing this? What am I afraid of losing? What does success actually feel like to me? These are not financial questions, yet they determine every financial decision you make. The mind that once obsessed over profit margins begins to notice the deeper margins, the ones between who you are and who you thought you needed to be. This is the turning point, when the listener stops asking how and starts asking who. How do I make more money? Becomes who do I need to become to handle more money wisely? How do I find opportunities? Becomes who do I need to be so that opportunities recognize me? It's no longer about tactics but identity, because wealth, like water, flows naturally toward the channels prepared to receive it. Without the structure of a new self, any external abundance leaks away through the cracks of old patterns. Overspending, overworking, overcompensating. Every fortune that vanishes quickly does so, because the person holding it never transformed fast enough to match its weight. Awareness, then, becomes the new currency. The wealthy do not simply manage assets, they manage attention. They notice the subtle ways emotion interferes with logic, the invisible habits that cost more than any bad investment. Awareness compounds faster than interest because it governs every choice that multiplies or depletes your wealth. Try a single moment of honest recognition, seeing how fear drives your spending or how ego drives your ambition, can save years of blind repetition. Awareness grows quietly, but its yield is exponential. The more you see yourself clearly, the more your decisions align naturally with growth, not self-sabotage. When the inner dialogue shifts from fear to trust, the outer world begins to respond in kind. Decisions once drenched in hesitation now flow with calm conviction. The same risks that once seemed paralyzing become manageable, not because they are smaller, but because your faith in your adaptability has grown larger. Fear loses its authority when you stop believing it's a prophecy and start treating it as a signal. The wealthy are not fearless. They are fluent in fear. They listen, translate, and move anyway. Trust doesn't silence uncertainty. It simply teaches you to walk beside it, without giving it the steering wheel. This transformation extends far beyond money. It reshapes relationships, with people, with work, and with time itself. When you stop seeing the world as scarce, you begin to approach others not as competitors, but as collaborators. You share ideas freely, because you no longer believe generosity reduces your share of the pie. Paradoxically, this openness invites more opportunities, not fewer. Energy spent on defense shifts to creation. Your time, once fragmented by worry, becomes focused, deliberate, peaceful. The world hasn't changed. Your perception has. And perception, more than any market trend, defines prosperity. Slowly, money loses its identity as a measure of survival and becomes something more elegant, a medium of expression. It's no longer a test of worth, but a tool of alignment. When wealth becomes an extension of who you are, not a compensation for who you aren't, you begin to use it differently. You invest not just in returns, but in resonance, in things that multiply meaning, not merely numbers. You realize that money can amplify beauty or fear, love or greed, depending on the consciousness of the one who wields it. In the hands of a clear mind, money becomes a brush-painting freedom. In the hands of an anxious one, it becomes a chain disguised as progress. And then, almost imperceptibly, the relentless hum of striving quiets. Growth no longer feels like pressure. It feels like peace. You're no longer running to escape scarcity. You're walking toward expansion. The metrics shift. Peace becomes profit, purpose becomes productivity. You start recognizing success not by how much you've accumulated, but by how lightly you can hold what you have. In that calm spaciousness, something profound happens. Wealth ceases to be something you chase and becomes something you are. It's an alignment of thought, action, and intention so steady that prosperity begins to mirror it without resistance. This is the true awakening, not a loud breakthrough, but a gentle realization that harmony, not hustle, sustains abundance. The richest lives are not those endlessly climbing, but those deeply rooted, capable of growing upward and inward at once. When you finally reach that stillness, you understand that wealth has never been about the numbers in your account, but the energy behind them, the clarity, courage, and calm from which they were created. And that realization, once it settles in, changes everything. Because once you see that the mirror has always been reflecting you, you stop chasing your reflection and start becoming the light. Success has a strange way of revealing what truly resides inside us. At first, it feels like the answer to everything. Proof that the long hours, the sacrifices, the risks were all worth it. The world applauds, the numbers rise, and for a fleeting moment you believe you've finally arrived. But then something subtle happens. The applause fades, and in the silence that follows, a different sound begins to echo. The internal noise that success cannot drown out. External success, when not anchored to inner peace, often amplifies what's unresolved within us. The wealth that was meant to free you can begin to cage you if your mind isn't quiet enough to hold it. It's a paradox most people only discover after reaching the summit. The higher they climb, the louder the world becomes. Expectations, comparisons, responsibilities. Many rise quickly only to find that their peace collapses under the weight of their possessions. They buy comfort but lose calm. They gain recognition but trade away rest. As Seneca once observed, it is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more. That is poor. The wealth they fought for becomes an endless maintenance project, of image, of identity, of lifestyle. The same ambition that once propelled them forward now traps them in motion they can't escape. The wise eventually learn that letting go is not losing. It's creating space for what's real. The clutter of accumulation, not just physical but emotional, can obscure the very peace success was supposed to bring. True mastery isn't in possessing more but in needing less. Letting go doesn't mean carelessness. It means clarity. It's the courage to release what no longer adds value, so that energy can flow where it's truly meant to. Like pruning a tree so it can grow stronger, simplicity is the discipline that sustains genuine abundance. When your worth no longer depends on what you hold, you begin to experience a kind of wealth that cannot be measured or taken away. Money, like water, flows best through those who don't try to dam it. The more we attempt to control its every movement, the more stagnant it becomes. Those who hoard from fear create a kind of spiritual drought, while those who circulate it wisely find that it always returns, multiplied, often in unexpected forms. The world responds to flow, not friction. The wealthiest people are not necessarily those who earn the most, but those who allow money to pass through their lives with intention rather than tension. They understand that generosity is not a subtraction, but an investment in the unseen network that connects all prosperity. As Paulo Coelho once wrote, "When you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it. The universe conspires most for those who trust in the flow." There's a story I once heard about a man named David, a successful entrepreneur who built his fortune through relentless drive. For years, he chased every deal, every opportunity, measuring his worth by his expanding empire. His calendar was full, his bank accounts fuller, yet he couldn't shake a persistent sense of emptiness. One evening, after finalizing yet another lucrative contract, he sat alone in his luxurious home and felt an unexpected hollowness settle in. Surrounded by everything he once dreamed of, he felt nothing. That night he realized that what he truly wanted was not more, but less. Less noise, less striving, less proving. David began selling off the ventures that didn't align with his peace. He stopped saying yes to deals that came from fear of missing out. He started walking, reading, thinking, rediscovering the quiet mind that had built his success in the first place. Over time, something remarkable happened. The fewer things he chased, the more opportunities found him. Clients sought him out not for his hustle, but for his presence. His energy changed, and so did the quality of what he attracted. He had stumbled upon a truth most never find, that peace is the ultimate profit. The paradox deepens. The less you chase, the more you attract. The less you need, the more you have. It sounds counterintuitive in a world that glorifies ambition and endless pursuit, but look closely, and you'll see it everywhere. The artist who creates for love, not validation, produces their finest work. The investor who waits patiently through volatility often earns more than the one frantically reacting to every fluctuation. The person who is content with enough becomes magnetic to more, not because they crave it, but because their energy carries no desperation. Abundance responds to calm the way seeds respond to fertile soil. When you begin to operate from that stillness, wealth starts to feel different. It's no longer about accumulation. It's about alignment. You stop asking, "How much can I make?" and start asking, "How much peace can I sustain while creating?" The goal shifts from having more to being more. More present, more wise, more generous. Success stops being a finish line and becomes a rhythm, a steady balance between effort and ease. You realize that true prosperity isn't loud or flashy. It's quiet, steady, deeply personal. The confidence that you can let go and still be complete. The world may still tell you to push harder, aim higher, never stop, but wisdom whispers a gentler truth. What you hold too tightly slips away. What you honor with peace remains. To master money is to master meaning, to understand that wealth expands only to the size of your inner stillness. It grows not from grasping, but from gratitude, not from striving, but from surrendering to the natural rhythm of creation and release. The paradox of success is not a trap, but an invitation, a chance to grow beyond the ego's hunger and into the soul's harmony. And from that harmony, something profound unfolds. Wealth begins to feel less like achievement and more like alignment, a reflection, not of what you've gained, but of who you've become. You stop standing on your fortune and start standing within it. That's when you finally see that success was never about reaching higher, but about reaching deeper. into the quiet center where peace and prosperity are one and the same. All the lessons begin to fold into one another, like a piece of music finding its chorus. What once felt like separate practices, managing beliefs, taming emotion, cultivating awareness, reveal themselves as threads woven into a single fabric. Mindset. Belief is not merely an isolated thought you entertain on Sunday mornings. It is the scaffolding that shapes how you respond to setbacks. Emotion is not an adversary to be defeated, but a messenger whose tone tells you where your edges are. Awareness is the gentle light that allows you to read both messenger and scaffold without mistaking them for the whole house. When these threads are woven together, they form habit, and habit, practiced patiently, becomes the architecture of a life that naturally generates wealth. At this stage, you begin to see scarcity for what it often is, a story you were told, not a law of nature. Scarcity is less about market cycles and more about the narrowness of our perception. Perhaps you learned early that resources were limited because your family tightened its belt during hard seasons, or because you watched adults whisper in worry and herded yourself into caution. Those experiences are real, but they are not destiny. With new perspective, you recognize scarcity's footprints, the way it molds choices, how it overvalues safety and undervalues possibility. And when that recognition arrives, the way you interact with money shifts from fear-driven protection to curious stewardship. The race that once felt urgent, the one whose finish line kept retreating, can quietly dissolve. Not because the outer world becomes fairer or easier, but because your vision changes. You no longer run to prove you belong. You move to create, to contribute, to build something that lasts. When vision widens, decisions cease to be frantic sprints and become deliberate steps. You start to see that many of the things you chased were not pathways to freedom, but distractions from it. Freedom in this sense is less an arrival and more a posture, a steadiness under pressure, a clarity of values that guides action without panic. With that steadiness, the restless mind begins to operate with intention rather than reactivity. Small choices, how you respond to an offer, how you allocate a sudden windfall, how you set boundaries around time, accumulate into patterns that look a great deal like character. Where others see cost, you start to see investment. Where others see risk, you ask what that risk might teach you if approached wisely. This is not specious optimism. It is the practiced habit of translating events into opportunities for growth. Over time, these habits compound, not merely into bigger balances, but into a richer capacity to steward resources well, to turn money into meaning, instead of letting it become an anxious scoreboard. There is a clearer mirror now. Wealth begins to resemble reflection rather than conquest. The balance sheet starts to echo the inner landscape, increased calm, sharpened clarity, and a renewed appetite for creative problem-solving. Money no longer serves as the primary arbiter of worth. Instead, it becomes a tool that amplifies the life you are building. This is subtle but profound. When your finances reflect your inner state, adjustments are less about frantic fixes and more about honest alignment. If your bank account is chaotic, you ask what part of your internal life needs tending. If your resources grow, you check whether your inner life has matured to hold them. The external and internal begin an honest conversation instead of a one-sided chase. The journey then returns you to the beginning, the mind. It is the marketplace where every fortune begins and, if neglected, where every fortune can quietly erode. This is not a romantic claim about thinking your way into riches. It is a clear-eyed observation about causality. You don't change outcomes simply by wanting them harder. You change them by cultivating the inner structures that produce different choices day after day. To be clear, this inner work is practical. It produces better decisions, increases resilience to volatility, and fosters the patience required for compound growth. It is the quiet labor of building scaffolding before adding floors, and with that work comes readiness, a steadiness that is not passive acceptance, but active embodiment. Embodiment means your actions, habits, and priorities are congruent with the values you profess. It means you don't merely chase wealth as an external event. You become someone whose presence, habits, and perspective naturally generate it. This readiness is humble and confident at once. Humble because it understands the role of luck and context. Confident because it knows preparation converts chances into results. When you embody wealth, you are less likely to be surprised by abundance or unmoored by loss. Instead, you meet each season with a practiced equilibrium that allows you to create, enjoy, and steward in equal measure. So now, standing at this circle's edge, consider the quiet commitments that will carry you forward, tending the mind's stories, listening to the heart without surrendering to it, training awareness until it guides instead of reflexes. These are the daily disciplines that look small, but accumulate into the greatest capital you will ever hold, the capital of a steady inner life. The outer world will continue to change, markets will rise and fall, and opportunities will sometimes arrive dressed as setbacks. But when belief, emotion, and awareness are woven together in a life of intention, the result is not merely a larger account balance, it is a fuller capacity to live richly in every sense of the word. That is the integration, that is the wholeness, and with it comes the quiet readiness to move from chasing wealth to being its very source. Return for a moment to the first time the word "not enough" landed in your chest. Perhaps it arrived as a whisper from a parent balancing bills at the kitchen table, or as a flash of shame when friends compared vacations and you counted pennies. Maybe it was quieter, the small, steady voice that said you were late to start, or that you'd never belong in rooms where money moved differently. Those early moments are not just memories. They are architecture. They set the tone for how you believed the world would treat you, and more importantly, how you would treat yourself. Revisiting that pain is not indulgence. It's reconnaissance. It allows you to see the old maps you've been following without realizing they were drawn by someone else's fear. There is tenderness in recognizing that what once felt like weakness was survival. The mind may have been clever, the strategies tight and practical, but the heart was learning in a different school, the school of relationship, of worth, of small human needs. Over time, what felt like scarcity became a teacher rather than an arresting sentence. The same anxieties that drove you to strive could also be read as signals pointing toward what needed tending. A sense of belonging, a steady throat of confidence, a clear story about why you earn and what you will do with it. Wisdom grows when you stop punishing the parts of yourself that once protected you and begin listening to what they were trying to say. Scarcity, once reframed, loses its tyrannical voice and becomes an informer. Instead of shouting that the pie is shrinking, it can teach you where economies are brittle and where your margins are thin. It stops being a curse and starts to be a map that shows you which habits to change, which relationships to shore up, and which values to elevate. I have met people who carried scarcity like armor for decades, only to discover that when they removed it, they did not fall. They simply felt for the first time the contours of space around them. What had seemed like protection was often the very thing preventing growth. Seeing scarcity as a tutor rather than an enemy opens the door to gentler correction and wiser strategy. Accepting imperfection is the quiet doorway back to peace. This doesn't mean settling for less or abandoning ambition. It means recognizing that your worth is not a ledger you must constantly balance. When you allow the messy human parts of your life to exist, late payments, imperfect investments, missed opportunities, without turning them into moral failures, tension eases. The nervous energy that once occupied every decision gets room to breathe, to slow down, to be thoughtful rather than reactive. Peace returns not as a reward for perfection, but as the byproduct of honesty. The honesty that you are enough while you are becoming. Gratitude quietly displaces grasping when you begin to notice what you already have. It is a small practice with disproportionate returns. A moment each morning to name what sustains you. An evening pause to acknowledge a kindness. A transaction reframed as an exchange rather than a loss. From gratitude, patience grows. Where panic once dictated choices, buy now because prices rise, hoard now because scarcity looms, patience allows consideration. It gives you the capacity to wait for aligned opportunities, to withstand market noise, and to keep working steadily while others chase quick fixes. The rhythm of gratitude and patience is not flashy, but it compounds, and over time it builds a life that feels steadier and truer. There comes an awakening that feels less like arriving at a destination and more like inhabiting a different climate. Abundance reveals itself not in spreadsheets but in stillness. You notice the corollary. The calmer your internal weather, the clearer the signals from the external world. You begin to measure success differently, not by the highest number on a statement, but by how peacefully you can hold the life you've made. Stillness does not mean passivity. It means the capacity to act from a full cup, rather than from scarcity. When that realization dawns, money becomes an expression of what you value, not a remedy for what you fear. In that inner stillness, wealth shifts roles. It becomes first an experience inside you, confidence in your choices, clarity about your priorities, gentleness with your mistakes, and only secondarily an external accumulation. You start to steward resources as extensions of your values, investing in people, in projects, in time, rather than hoarding for a hypothetical future that may never arrive. This perspective changes your daily life. The small acts of spending, saving, and giving no longer feel like battlegrounds but like opportunities to reflect who you are. Wealth, then, is not an altar at the end of a race. It is the echo of a life lived with purpose, and so the work of healing your relationship with money is both subtle and radical. It is subtle because it happens in the margins of your days, in the language you use with yourself, the pauses you allow before decisions, the way you welcome gratitude into routine. It is radical because it undoes the imperative that your value must be proven by accumulation. When scarcity stops being the director of your story, you will find that courage and contentment can live in the same heart. The final lesson here is simple and deep. Abundance is less a number and more a posture. If you can cultivate stillness, you will find that wealth arrives not as rescue but as resonance, a natural echo of the life you have learned to hold. There comes a moment in every meaningful journey when the chase dissolves into quiet understanding. The noise fades, the striving softens, and what remains is presence. The kind of presence that cannot be bought or won, only realized. It is, here in the stillness after the pursuit, that the truest form of wealth begins to breathe. For so long the road was defined by ambition, the next milestone, the next breakthrough, the next account balance that promised peace. But when the finish line disappears, when there is no more next to run toward, something beautiful happens. The heart stops sprinting and starts listening. The rhythm of life becomes slower, steadier, not out of defeat, but out of deep respect for the ground already covered. Gratitude rises naturally in this quieter landscape. It is not the gratitude, of celebration, not the kind that shouts from a mountaintop or posts pictures of success, but the soft, grounded kind that whispers, "I made it through." You begin to see that what mattered most was never the acquisition itself, but the growth it required. The lessons hidden inside failure, the discipline forged in uncertainty, the humility that only hardship could teach. These were the true treasures accumulating all along. It's humbling to realize that even the detours, the mistakes, and the moments of doubt were necessary. Every season, the lean years and the fruitful ones, played its part in shaping the person capable of holding peace. Humility, once seen as weakness, now feels like wisdom. It enters the room quietly, settling in the same chair where ego once dictated decisions. It doesn't scold or shame. It simply reminds you that control was always an illusion. You can plan, you can prepare, you can persist, but the outcome has always belonged to something larger than you. Humility brings perspective. It teaches that wealth is not a contest but a communion, not a performance but a practice. In its presence, peace finally has room to breathe. The weight of proving oneself, to others, to family, to the old voice of insecurity, starts to lift. What replaces it is clarity, the realization that true wealth was never about having more, but about needing less to feel whole. The wealthy mind, the truly wealthy mind, no longer chases perfection. It lives in rhythm with imperfection, accepting that the edges of life will never be clean or symmetrical. There will always be fluctuations, in markets, in moods, in meaning, and that's not a sign of failure, but of life itself unfolding. This awareness changes the way you move. You stop fighting the natural tide of things and begin to surf it instead. You learn when to act and when to wait, when to invest and when to rest. What once felt like a constant battle for control now becomes a dance with flow, graceful, adaptive, alive. And so every decision, even the small, ordinary ones, begins to feel sacred. Choosing how to spend, where to give, when to pause, what to prioritize, these no longer feel like transactions, but reflections of who you are. There's a quiet intentionality behind your choices now, a subtle awareness that energy flows where attention goes. The meals you share, the people you support, the ideas you nurture, all of it becomes part of your wealth. Each act feels aligned with a deeper truth, that money was never meant to isolate you, but to connect you, never to inflate your image, but to expand your impact. In this alignment, the ordinary becomes meaningful, and the meaningful becomes enough. What began as ambition slowly transforms into meditation. The drive that once pushed you forward now guides you inward. Instead of chasing results, you cultivate awareness. You start to notice the simple abundance of breath, the luxury of time, the richness of quiet mornings. The pursuit of external wealth shifts into a practice of internal alignment. You realize that the same principles that govern money, consistency, compounding, stewardship, also govern peace. And when your inner economy stabilizes, your outer world begins to mirror it naturally. Prosperity stops being a prize and becomes a posture. This is where the listener, you, begins to sense a profound truth that words can barely hold. Enough was never a destination. It was a perspective waiting to be seen. The mind that once measured worth in scarcity now measures life in sufficiency. Enough time, enough love, enough air in your lungs to feel the fullness of being alive. The irony, of course, is that once you truly feel enough, opportunities tend to multiply. Not because you chase them harder, but because you no longer chase at all. You've stopped clutching at life, and in doing so, your hands are finally open to receive it. The road to wealth was never just about money. It was about remembering your own capacity to create, to choose, to align. Grace enters in this remembering. It forgives the mistakes made out of fear, honors the risks taken in faith, and softens the edges of relentless self-criticism. You look back not with regret, but with reverence. Every step, even the missteps, led you here, to this calm, aware state of being. Grace is not earned, it's allowed. It flows in when you stop trying to fix the past and start blessing it for what it taught you, and so, the pursuit ends not in applause, but in presence. The wealth you once sought outside now lives quietly within, in gratitude, in humility, in rhythm, in grace. You realize you were never running toward wealth. You were returning to yourself. The numbers, the status, the milestones, they were chapters, not conclusions. The story was always about awakening, not accumulation. And now, standing in this quiet wholeness, you feel something you may not have felt in a very long time. A simple, profound sense that enough is already here. Wealth is not a trophy you hang on the wall to prove you arrived. It is a mirror you study to understand who you are becoming. When you look at your accounts, your investments, the way you spend and give, you are not simply tallying assets and liabilities. You are reading a reflection of your inner life. This reflection is honest in ways friends and accolades are not. It shows the priorities you whisper to yourself when no one is listening, the fears you tuck into spreadsheets, the values you practice in small, ordinary transactions. If you want to know your true currency, do not only check the balance. Listen to the conversations you have with money, the stories you tell when you decide how much to save, where to invest, who to hire, what to give. What you attract externally is always a dialogue with what you hold internally. Beliefs seed behavior. Behavior creates results that confirm beliefs, and the loop turns until you either notice it or remain trapped by it. Morgan Housel reminds us that our personal history colors our financial view, and this is why two people faced with the same opportunity respond so differently. One interprets the same market drop as ruin, the other as a bargain. One treats a raise as evidence that they must keep proving themselves. The other treats it as a tool to expand what matters. The external world simply echoes what you already carry, which means transformation begins not with portfolio reallocation, but with the quieter work of reorganizing your inner priorities. Order the inner world, and the outer world follows, not in some magical instant way, but in steady, inevitable alignment. When your days are governed by clear values, disciplined curiosity, patient risk-taking, generosity without attachment, the financial choices you make cease to be frantic or reactive. They become expressions of a consistent character. Instead of seeing money as either the enemy or the savior, you begin to use it as a measure of effectiveness. Does this purchase, this investment, this gift reflect the person I intend to be? Over time, small, aligned choices compound into portfolios and practices that feel less like luck and more like the natural consequence of an ordered interior life. Here is the great revelation that overturns many assumptions. Money rarely changes the core of a person. It reveals it. Wealth can magnify what already exists. Your patience or your panic, your generosity or your grasping. Napoleon Hill put it plainly, whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe, it can achieve, but that achievement does not alter the mind. It exposes it. If you arrive at a larger balance sheet still anxious, still defensive, then the work has only shifted to the next level. The real work is mastery over self before mastery over systems. That mastery looks like patience to wait for the right opportunities, courage to act when alignment appears, and discernment to know which of the many paths genuinely serve your values. To pursue wealth is a human instinct. To become wealth is a quiet art. Becoming wealth means your presence, habits, and decisions carry the calm confidence that money often seeks to buy but cannot manufacture. It means your time is measured not by frantic activity, but by meaningful contribution. Your relationships are prioritized over showy accumulation. Your legacy is defined by the capacity to sustain value, not merely by the size of a bank account. This is not asceticism, it is integration. The wealthy person in this sense is not someone who hoards or flaunts, but someone whose inner economy, the balance of fear and faith, restraint and risk, giving and growing, consistently produces external abundance that is usable, durable, and life-giving. So what does it mean to practice this in ordinary life? It means starting small and staying honest. It means asking before each major decision, does this align with who I want to be? It means cultivating habits that outlast moods, such as automated saving, deliberate generosity, and regular reflection on why you choose the work you do. It means allowing setbacks to teach rather than derange you, and treating success as an opportunity to check your center rather than to inflate it. When these practices become habitual, wealth arrives less as a frantic pursuit and more as an attendant of the person you have become. If there is a final truth to carry with you as you move through the chapters to follow, it is this: abundance is not merely a ledger entry. It is a remembered state of being. The world rewards those who can hold clarity under pressure, who can tolerate delay with dignity, who can expand their capacity before they expand their holdings. True wealth is not something you simply get. It is something you grow into. When your inner life is rich, your external life naturally reflects that richness. And in the quiet mirror of your finances, you will see not only what you have amassed, but who you are. And perhaps finally, who you were always meant to be. Thank you for walking this path with me. Not toward a trophy, not toward a final bank balance, but toward a quieter truth that lives beneath both hunger and headline. There is a kind of companionship that forms when someone chooses curiosity over compulsion, when they lean into questions instead of answers. You have listened not just for tactics, but for tone, not merely for how to increase accounts, but for how to rearrange the heart so that money becomes a tool rather than a trial. That willingness to stay with the interior work, to notice old stories, to test new rhythms, to allow mistakes to teach rather than to define, is the braver form of wealth building. In this space, your attention becomes the currency that matters most. May your thoughts grow richer by becoming kinder to themselves, cultivating the patient clarity that allows bold action without franticness. Rich thinking is not merely having clever plans, but holding space for life's contradictions, ambition and rest, gain and gratitude, prudence and generosity. Let your plans be anchored in values you can live by tomorrow as well as 10 years from now, and let your thinking be wide enough to include both prudence and play. When thoughts deepen in this way, behavior follows with less strain and more alignment. Decisions stop being desperate grabs and become deliberate choices made from a calm center. So over time, that inner consistency compounds into freedom. May your actions grow calmer, not because you stop caring, but because you stop being driven by the quieter tyrannies of fear and approval. Calm action comes from the practiced ability to pause, to breathe before agreeing to a commitment, to reflect before reallocating resources, to check motive before moving money. It's the discipline of doing the next right thing, rather than all the things you think will prove your worth. When you practice this, you conserve energy for the high-leverage moves that actually matter, and you create space for serendipity to appear. Calmness is not slowness. It is a wise speed that preserves capacity. May your life become more aligned, where habits, relationships, and work form a coherent field rather than competing factions. Alignment is the hidden ROI of a life well-ordered. It is the compounding of small, consistent choices that reflect your priorities. When you align with what you value, money becomes a meaningful instrument, funding projects that matter, supporting people you love, and buying you time to deepen what cannot be bought. Alignment also means boundaries, saying no to good things that distract from the great, and yes to the few things that make your life larger. This is how the practical and the poetic intersect, and how an ordinary day becomes a place where purpose and provision meet. Remember, you are not chasing wealth. You are becoming its source. This is not a slogan, but a posture. Becoming wealth means tending the inner qualities that reliably create outer abundance. Curiosity that learns, humility that listens, courage that acts, patience that waits, and generosity that circulates value freely. It means acknowledging luck and context, while faithfully preparing so that when opportunity appears, you are ready to steward it well. Wealth earned in this way feels like consequence rather than conquest. It arrives as a natural echo of who you have chosen to be, and in that truth every moment from here forward is already enough.